Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. We're doing something a little bit different today, and this is something that hasn't shown up on the channel before, but if you've been following me over on Reddit or on Twitter or you're in my Discord, I've been posting a deck every single day for Magic, all around some aspect of Pride. I figured since it's June, we're talking about Pride Month, I wanted to do a different deck every single day just because I think it's good to highlight some of the representation in Magic, and I think that it's a good way for people to look at decks and either see themselves or at least have something to show off who they are, because I think everybody is wonderful and everyone deserves a chance to be themselves. But like I mentioned, I have not shown any of them on YouTube yet, so I wanted to go ahead and just kind of walk everybody through all 30 days of my Pride decks. And then if this is something that you're interested in seeing make a return next year, please do let me know. I would love to do this again. It was a ton of fun. So some basic quick rules before we get into this. Number one, all of the decks are built on a $100 or less budget, very similar to our Commanders Guild series. And every deck has two commanders. So for the month of June, Wizards of the Coast has been doing a promotion where you can play two partner commanders that are not normally allowed to be partners. And so that's kind of what this entire series was built off of. So let's start with our first one, and then I'll kind of give a quick rundown of each deck as we go. So our very first deck is the Femininomenon, a shout out to Chapel Rowan for the name, but I got it originally from my wife because she's a huge Chapel Rowan fan. But we wanted to highlight, of course, Catti-brie of Mithril Hall and Jarina, Dauntless General. The themes of the actual mechanics of the deck, it's a very human and equipment-focused deck. It wants to just make a ton of humans and be able to benefit from Jarina making everything indestructible. And then it, of course, wants to make Catti-brie incredibly large so she can just one-shot people out of the game. But this is, of course, the start of our LGBT decks. This is the L. This is representing a lesbian couple in a way that I think they benefit from each other, both mechanic-wise, and it feels like they'd be a pair that could fit well together. So hopefully for everyone who is watching this, you're able to find someone who's capable of complementing you in unique ways, but also letting you still be 100% yourself, because I think it's important that we don't lose who we are in everything as well. So deck number 2 is going to be Legolas and Yomeji, Kissing. And for this one, I kind of went to my Commanders Guild roots for this channel, and I went to EDH Rec because they have a random button that selects a random commander. And I chose two commanders completely at random, and I was given Legolas Greenleaf and Yomeji, who bars the way. And it was very interesting because they both actually work well with legendary creatures. Legolas gets larger every time you play a legendary creature, and Yomeji is going to return legendaries from the graveyard into play or from the graveyard to hand, and then whatever else is going on in the deck is going to be very heavily focused on those legendary synergies. Plus, of course, there's some ramp because, you know, Yomeji is 7 mana and we're playing Selesnya, so we might as well ramp. But I wanted to do the random commanders because I think that it's important that we recognize that everyone has the opportunity to be with the person that they choose to be with, regardless of anything like race, religion, gender, etc. Any other qualifiers that may be out there. I think it's very important that you find the person that you care about, or the multiple persons that you care about, depending on your perspective, and just find a way to make yourself happy, because who knows who out there could be the person to help make you happy. If you're happy on your own, of course, that is perfectly fine as well. Moving into deck number 3, we have Da Bears. So we have Halsin, who is not technically a bear, although if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, you may realize that he is in fact also a bear. And Kudo, King Among Bears, who turns everything into bears. So you can kind of get where this one is coming from. This is not technically our first gay couple because Legolas and Yomeji, I think, would fall into that category as well. But I believe that both of these characters are identifying as male, so I do believe that they would be considered a gay couple. And of course, we got to represent our bears out there. We love you. You're all amazing. So obviously, the themes for this actual deck are bears. We wanted to play as many bears as possible and cards that care about bears. And then tokens, because Halcyon can turn any token into a 4/4 bear, meaning that quite literally everything can be bears. So you've heard of Bearscape, it's in here. That's kind of what we're going for. Next up for deck number 4, we have Loving Yourself with Kiki-Jiki, Mirror Breaker, and Illyrios Enraptured. One of the things that I really tried to focus on with this series of decks is that everybody, regardless of who you are, is worthy of love. You are valid. You deserve to be happy because you are an amazing person. And a lot of times it's very easy to forget that with everything going on, especially with the way that the world works at the moment. It's very easy to forget sometimes that we should also love ourselves. So I wanted to use Kiki-Jiki and Illyrios. Illyrios, of course, being a magic version of Narcissus, definitely does love himself. But Kiki-Jiki also makes copies of things. Illyrios makes reflections. So this deck has a combination of clones, and it does have a combo package. So it's very quick to go infinite and kind of just do its own thing. So that is day number 4. Day number 5 is going to be Halana and Elena, partners, and Inga and Essika, which is a lot of people, but this is the Polycule. This deck is for everyone who just has so much love that they need to be able to share it with more than one person. Anyone out there who is polyamorous, who is in a relationship with more than one person, you are still perfectly valid. The way that you love others is perfectly valid. And we have this idea in our society that a monogamous relationship is quote unquote the right way to do things, but obviously that is not the case. Whoever you love and however you love is perfectly fine with me, and I hope that it is perfectly fine with yourself as well. As for the deck itself, this is all about +1/+1 counters coming from Halana and Elena, and the big mana coming from Inga and Essika. So the main goal is to play a bunch of mana dorks, very small creatures, and then slowly build them up into bigger and bigger threats to try to win the game. Moving on to deck number 6, we have the Gruul Friends. This is Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh, and Nissa, Vastwood Seer. So again, this is designed to represent some of the characters in Magic that are members of the LGBT community. Chandra has been openly depicted as bisexual, and Nissa has been openly depicted as lesbian. So having these two together in essentially a ship, I guess, for lack of a better term, because they are not officially together in Magic, at least not as far as I'm aware. If I'm wrong, please do let me know. I would love to know if it ever became official that they were together. But because they are who they are in Magic, and because they are two of the main characters in the main story, at least for some time with the Gatewatch, I think it's important that they get the representation that they deserve, because they do represent a large portion of our community, and that's very important. Now, the deck itself is very heavily Super Friends and character themed. I tried to put in every single Chandra and Nissa card that I could. There is the one Sarkhan Sneak because we need to make sure we have a win condition, but of course it's very heavily centered on these two women because I think that's a good way to build the character of, well, our Gruul Friends. So, moving on to deck number 7, we've got the Poets of the Sun, yet another representation of an actual couple in Magic the Gathering. Saheeli and Huatli are I believe, the most recent couple. They're a very cute couple coming from very different places and very different backgrounds. Saheeli, of course, being the artificer from Kaladesh, and Huatli being the dinosaur poet, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. I know she has a specific title. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But she's from Ixalan, so having that representation not only of characters that are LGBTQ in the actual Magic story, but also representations of real-world diversity, because Saheeli coming from Kaladesh based off of India and some other Southeast Asian countries, and Huatli coming from Ixalan, which is a Mesoamerican society. So we get some of those other representations in here as well. And of course, combining them into one actual physical deck means that we get to have a ton of dinosaurs, we get to have a ton of ramp, and then Saheeli is going to make basically dinosaur robots, token copies of our dinosaurs, which is super cool. So wanted to, of course, highlight these two. Deck number 8 is Platonic Life Partners with Vona, Butcher of Magan, and Shana, Purifying Blade. Mechanically, this is kind of just a life gain and life drain deck. It wants to gain as much life as possible and then use that life to slowly chip away at your opponents. But as for the overall story of the deck, sometimes there are people who just don't have any interest in a romantic relationship. People who are aromantic or asexual just may not have that necessarily drive or desire to have a romantic or sexual relationship with another person, and that's perfectly fine. You can have people in your life that are important to you that are not a romantic partner. You can have friends, you can have platonic partners. There are plenty of people who lead very rich and fulfilling lives, whether they love someone romantically or love someone platonically, and that's perfectly fine and valid, and we love you just the same. Moving on to deck number 9, we have the Transatlantic Railroad, a showcase for two of the most prominent trans characters in Magic. So for the longest time, we had Alesha, who was trans male to female, but we didn't have a good character to represent the female to male trans characters. And so when we got Yuma in one of the most recent sets, we had the representation for both, which was incredibly important because sometimes there's a big focus on one instead of the other. And it's important that everybody realizes that whoever you are, however you were born, you have the right and the necessity, I suppose, to be yourself. And no matter who you are, you deserve to be happy regardless of the situation you were born into. And if that means changing that situation, that is perfectly fine, perfectly valid. You deserve to do that and you deserve to be happy. So like I said, we have Alesha and Yuma to represent that, and the deck itself is centered mostly around landfall and dredge synergies. Being able to put a ton of creatures and lands into the graveyard means we can cast Yuma quicker and get lands out of our graveyard, and then Alesha can get the creatures out of our graveyard. So it's a little bit Reanimator, but mostly the landfall and the dredge. Deck number 10 is Shades of Grey. I will be perfectly honest, I could not think of a name for this deck to save my life. So if you can think of a better name, please do let me know. But this deck is designed to showcase the members of the LGBT community who may be with a partner that is not a member of the LGBT community. So a lot of times this shows up as someone who is bisexual in a relationship with a straight partner, but there are plenty of other situations as well. It's important to realize that your partner does not determine your sexuality or your identity, because if you are a bisexual woman who is dating a straight man, that doesn't eliminate the fact that you are a bisexual woman. And the same goes for bisexual men dating men, bisexual men dating women. Just because you are dating a person or with somebody does not eliminate the identity that you are choosing for yourself and the identity that you are open to expressing. So with that being said, I want to dive into the actual deck as well. So this is a +1/+1 counter and aggro deck because we have Felisa, Fang of Silverquill, and Mikaeus the Lunarch. The colors were intended to represent the bisexual nature of Felisa with white and black, and Mikaeus just having the white means that, not both sides. I hope that comes across. That was my thinking at the time, at least. But being able to put +1/+1 counters on pretty much everything on the board, that's all this deck wants to do, because then once your creatures are destroyed, they have +1/+1 counters on them. You can make Inkling creatures with Felisa. You can put more counters on them with Mikaeus. It just kind of gets out of hand, essentially, as the game goes on. Moving on to day number 11, we have the NB or non-binary buddies. This deck is for everyone out there who is non-binary, someone who may not feel like you fit a specific gender. Maybe you fit more than one, maybe you fit a different one depending on the day. We'll get more specific into some of those later on, so hold on to some of that. But I wanted to remove the colors from the deck because maybe in the same way in Magic that you don't really want to be defined by a specific color, maybe you don't want to be defined by a specific gender. So instead of worrying about having whichever color to represent whichever gender, we just got rid of them because you are whoever you want to be. To all of our they thems out there and she-shays and everything else that you may want to be, and that you may find yourself questioning at any time, or you may find yourself wanting to kind of explore some of those opportunities. That is perfectly valid, perfectly fine. You are amazing no matter what. And for the deck itself, there's not a ton of different things you can do with a non-colorless deck, but the idea here is we're focusing on the +1/+1 counters from Omarthus and Sir Ginger to be able to essentially make a ton of artifacts and sacrifice them to keep getting our other creatures to be bigger and just keep overwhelming the board. So it has a bit of an Aristocrats feel to it, but it does focus very heavily on artifacts. Deck number 12 is going to be Giant Strides with Kalemni, Disciple of Iroas, and Agar, the Freezing Flame. The way that the LGBT community has been moving forward since the late 80s, since even earlier than that, we are focusing very heavily on taking these giant strides toward equality, these giant strides toward acceptance, and that is a very tricky thing to do. So for everybody who wants to identify differently than you were assigned at birth, or maybe just wants to keep pushing for the rights and the equalities of everyone around you, maybe even including yourself, you are very important. And I know that the opportunity to do those kinds of things is difficult and scary. And so I hope that you do keep pushing for your own happiness and do keep pushing for your own identity, because it is relevant, it's important, and you're amazing. So obviously, if we're talking about taking those giant strides forwards, we are going to be using giants with, like I said, Kalemni and Agar. And there's also a bit of a control aspect to this deck, being able to just kind of burn out its opponent's creatures. And I am also going to mention this. I tried to get the colors of the deck the closest I could to the Trans Pride flag, which is blue, pink, and white. Obviously, pink is not a color in Magic, so we're sticking with red. So hopefully that comes through in the deck itself. Moving into day number 13, we have Soldiering On with Commander Mustard and Harbin Vanguard Aviator. Both of these commanders care very heavily about soldiers, so this is a soldier deck, and it does make a ton of soldier tokens because it really wants to go as wide as possible to get the advantage of the Vigilance, Trample, and Haste from Commander Mustard, and then flying with Harbin. So being able to do all that makes it kind of your traditional soldier deck, but it is Jeskai, which I think is very unique for a soldier deck. As for the actual theme behind it, this is for everyone trying to figure out who they are. Sometimes you have a bit of a personal awakening happen at maybe just random times, or maybe there's something in your life that triggers some of those thoughts of maybe there's something you want to explore. So in this case, it could possibly, be the volleyball scene in Top Gun, and I know that's super specific, so don't at me. That's just where we are with things, but you get my point. Sometimes you never know when you're going to learn more about yourself, but however it happens, it's completely valid. And learning about yourself later in life is just as valid about learning yourself very early on in your life. So don't let it stress you out. If you're still questioning yourself later into your life, that's perfectly fine. You are doing great. We love you. You're amazing. Moving on to day number 14, we have A Marriage of Guilds. This is another representation of the gay characters in Magic the Gathering, in this case Ral and Tomik, who are canonically married. And I love Ral and Tomik specifically because they are from different guilds in Ravnica, and a lot of the lore we get from Ravnica is that the guilds tend not to like each other very much. So to see them crossing the boundaries of the guilds because they do genuinely love each other, I hope that's something that you, and honestly myself as well, can take into our real world and find the person that you love regardless of some of the barriers that may be in the way. Maybe there's distance, maybe it's working for rival companies in the way that Ral and Tomik are, but hopefully whoever you are and whoever you love, never stop that from letting you find your happiness. And for the deck itself, this is a Storm and Spellslinger deck. There are a couple of Planeswalkers to take advantage of Tomik's ability, but really we're trying to go all in on flipping Ral and then using his abilities as a Planeswalker to get a ton of damage from our instants and sorceries, just kind of storming off as much as possible, and then using Tomik's ability to just kind of protect us in case we can't storm off or need time to set up. Deck number 15, so we are officially halfway through our list, is Discovering Yourself with Fibblethip the Lost and Morska Undersea Sleuth. So Fibblethip is going to be drawing us cards. Morska is going to be making us some clues, which is then going to be drawing cards and putting +1/+1 counters on themselves. And so this is obviously, in terms of the deck, a lot of card draw, a lot of clues. There's some artifact synergies. We really just want to focus on investigating. And that translates over to the actual theme of the deck, because investigating is really one of the most important parts of finding out who you are. There's very few people who know immediately who you are, your sexuality, your gender, the things that you're happy about, the things that you're trying to figure out. It's very rare that that is a quick and simple process. More often than not, it's often a long, sometimes messy process. But I hope that that never stops you from finding out who you are, because it's very relevant to the overall happiness that you're going to be finding throughout the course of your life. And I hope that you're able to find that happiness, because it is genuinely important. And like we talked about earlier with the loving yourself aspect, a lot of times just learning more about who you are is going to be the biggest step you can take. It's often the scariest step you can take, but I think that you are worth it and you definitely do deserve it. Moving on to day number 16, we have fluidity. So earlier we talked about non-binary in the sense that someone may not fit a specific gender. They're kind of in the middle. But this is going to be more for the people who are gender fluid, or maybe just questioning where you fall in terms of gender. So some days you may wake up and decide you're feeling more male on a certain day. Maybe you're feeling more female on a certain day. Maybe you're feeling more non-binary on a certain day. That is perfectly fine. But it is difficult sometimes to feel like you fit in when you're kind of going back and forth. It may be difficult to explain to the people around you what exactly you're feeling and how you're feeling it. But no matter what, you are perfect just the way that you are. You may not feel like you fit in, but I promise you that you do. There are people who love you. There's people who care about you. And you're amazing just the way that you are. As for the deck itself, this is very heavily focused on spell slingers and clones. We want to copy things with Orvar's ability, and then we want to copy things with Morit's ability, but you'll notice they kind of copy different things. So Orvar, we need to use instants and sorceries. Morit needs to copy permanents. So between the two, we kind of just have ways to copy pretty much everything that we have in the deck. Moving on to deck number 17, we have our power couple. This is for everyone out there who has found someone that allows you to truly be yourself while also still complementing the best parts of you. A lot of times we can kind of get distracted and lose sight of who we are when we're with a partner, or maybe we take on some of that partner's abilities and some of their traits and things like that. But it's also relevant to find someone who compliments you, someone who lets you be yourself and the best version of yourself. And if that best version of yourself is with somebody else, that's awesome. If it's not, that is also awesome. You are still perfect and you're still valid and you still deserve to be happy. So to that end, like I said, we have the Gitrog monster and Borborygmos Enraged. Obviously, they're not necessarily going to be the weakest deck at the table, shall we say. A Jund, Landfall, and Dredge deck with the Gitrog monster and Borborygmos in the command zone is definitely going to be noticed. It is a very powerful combination. That is, of course, where the power couple name comes from. So I would recommend that if you're playing this deck, you let your opponents know, because they will probably be gunning for you pretty early on when you're playing a ton of lands and drawing a ton of cards and just filling up your graveyard and doing damage. So be aware going into it if you wanted to put this deck together. Moving on to deck number 18, we have the Pauper Partners. I wanted to, for at least one of the decks during the month, make a Pauper deck. So that means we have 2 uncommon commanders, and every other card in the deck is a Pauper legal card. That means it's been printed at common at some point. So I wanted to try to find a way to make that work, and so we found Adeliz, the Cinderwind, and Balmor, Battlemage Captain. with Adeliz essentially giving prowess to your wizards, but only for instants and sorceries, and then Balmor giving +1/+0 and trample to all your creatures, but again, only for instants and sorceries. So this is a bit of a spellslinger prowess wizard style deck, because it wants to get just a couple of token generators into play, and then just churn out a ton of tokens, make a ton of creatures, and have a huge board and just smack your opponents kind of out of nowhere. And as for the actual theme of the deck, this is for everyone who might be looking for your people, the people that you fit in with. I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with. When I was actually in middle school and high school, I was in a very small town. It was very difficult for me to find that group of people that I really meshed with, and I actually didn't really find that group until I hit my junior year of high school. So it took a lot of time, it took a lot of searching. But now I'm very happy with the people that I surround myself with, and I hope that if you right now are questioning, where you fit in, you're trying to find those people, you're trying to find your people, your group, you will. Don't worry about it too much. I know that doesn't mean too much coming from me. Just saying don't worry tends to not work, but you'll find it. You'll find people who fit, and you'll find the people that you want to be with. You'll find your happiness. You're great. You're amazing. Moving on to deck number 19. We have the Transplanar Partners. So this is another shout out to two canonically trans characters in Magic. We have Xantcha and Kadira, who are both male to female trans characters. Xantcha is a little bit trickier. I know that she is not technically like full human, despite the fact that she looks like it. So I believe that she kind of doesn't fit any quote unquote gender. So to the best of my knowledge, she chose to identify as female, so she would be classified as a trans character. And then Kadira, same thing, born male, chose to identify as female. And that is going to be something that's very relevant for Magic, because there's not that many representation for trans characters, and like we mentioned earlier with Alesha and Yuma, there's only one female to male trans representation, but it's still important to recognize that they are in fact representations, and it's also relevant that they come from different planes. Xantcha is a Magic character, Kadira is a D&D character, so technically, they are coming together from across the planes, just like you could find a partner maybe somewhere you're not expecting it. As for the deck itself, this is an artifact and token deck, so this is going to be a lot more focused on creating small artifact creatures and small artifact tokens like clues and blood and things like that, to be able to then make Thopters that turn into bunnies, with Kadira being able to give away Xantcha to draw cards and do damage. So it really does focus on the artifacts and the tokens, but there are a couple of other things in there as well. Moving on to deck number 20, we have Pan Pride. So this is, as the name might suggest, a Pan Pride deck. This is for everyone who identifies as pan-romantic, pansexual, anyone out there who loves who you love regardless of who the other person is. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You are valid and perfect just the way that you are. And I'm glad that you are able to find yourself in a way that recognizes the people around you are worthy of love as well. I think that's a great thing for you, for the people around you. And we all deserve a little bit of that happiness to find the people that we care about. As for the deck itself, this is Kutzil, Malamet Exemplar, and Grumgully the Generous. This is an aggressive style deck that focuses on modified creatures, being able to play Grumgully and have non-humans enter with +1/+1 counters, and then Kutzil to draw cards after that. So this is definitely a deck that can be very fast and do a lot of damage. So if you're interested in an aggressive modified deck, this could be the one for you. Moving on to number 21, we have Question for the Council with Tabarax, Hope's Demise, and Aura Skyclave Hierophant. This is a cleric and reanimation style deck that wants to pretty much just play a ton of clerics, sacrifice them, gain life, and then reanimate them, eventually winning probably through beatdowns with Tabarax or through some life drain with some of the sacrifice synergies. But as for the theme itself, this is for everyone out there who might be questioning where you are, what you stand, your sexuality, your identity. a lot of things can change throughout the course of your life. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to not know necessarily where you are or what you're doing at any given time. Sometimes people just know things right away, and other times it takes some more thinking, it takes some more planning. But no matter what, you are valid, you are amazing, and whether you are questioning yourself or not, or questioning your sexuality or your identity or anything else, it's important to know that that is perfectly normal. It's okay to question who you are, what you're doing, what the plan is, what's going on, because we as human beings are very complicated creatures, and that is perfectly okay. So if you are questioning anything about yourself, don't take that as a sign that you are somehow wrong or there's something wrong with you. You're perfect. You're fine. Just don't don't let it freak you out. It's okay. Moving on to number 22, we have demigods. And this is, of course, represented by two of the demigods in Magic, Callaphe, beloved of the sea, and Renata, called to the hunt. And this deck is for everyone who identifies as demi-romantic or demisexual. Sometimes the connection with a person is one of the most important things in a relationship, and there's less focus on the physical attractiveness and more of needing to connect with somebody. And again, that is, as we've mentioned with everything else, perfectly valid and awesome. You deserve happiness no matter how you love people and no matter how you go about loving people. There's nothing wrong with that. For the deck itself, this is a +1/+1 counters deck that also focuses on devotion, which is very tricky to do when we have a card that cares about blue devotion in Callaphe and a card that cares about green devotion in Renata. So pretty much every card in the deck is a Simic card. It has both green and blue in the mana cost, and I tried very hard to focus on the hybrid mana so that way we could get devotion for both of them at the exact same time with the same cards. So with that, we're going to move on to deck number 23, and this is for LGBT households. So a lot of times we focus on who we specifically love, but sometimes it's important to remember that there are families out there that may not necessarily represent someone in the LGBT community specifically. So there might be a child with two moms, or a child with two dads, or a child with a set of parents. Maybe they have a polycule of parents, and that's okay. All families are legitimate as long as they are happy, as long as you're loved, as long as you know what you stand for, who you are, all of that kind of stuff. Your household and your family is amazing. And it's important to remember that sometimes the parents of the LGBT families can kind of also suffer a little bit from maybe things like bullying, maybe people at school not understanding their life situation. So a lot of times it's not just about the parents in particular, it's about the whole family. And so to that end, I wanted to use Sekiko, Mother of Summer, and the Goose Mother, two of what, in my opinion, the best mothers in all of Magic, to make a bit of a food style deck that focuses heavily on the artifact synergies of creating the food tokens, because then you can turn that into mana with Sekiko, you can turn that into a giant Goose Mother and just kind of run over the game. Moving on to deck number 24, we have Y'all Means All. This deck has Aragorn, King of Gondor, and Teferi, Mage of Zhalfir, that focuses very heavily on the themes of Monarch and Initiative, anything that's really focused on combat, because that is one of my personal favorite ways to play. And if we're being perfectly honest, after putting together 30 decks, I think in terms of my own playstyle, this is probably my favorite one, because it really just wants the game to progress. It just wants to be attacking. It wants to be getting the rest of the table involved, which I think is super cool. And then the actual theme of the deck itself. This is for everyone out there who is a part of the LGBT community and is also a person of color. Since people of color are almost always at the highest risk of anyone in the LGBT community, there's often underrepresentation for people of color in the LGBT community. So I wanted to make sure that we recognize everyone. Like I said, y'all does in fact mean all. Everyone deserves to be safe. Everyone deserves to be happy, and nobody deserves to be hated or hurt just for being who they are. So With that, we're going to move on to deck number 25, which is Representing Magic. Again, this is representing two openly gay characters in Magic. We have Will and Vadric. Now, canonically, they are not a couple, but I did want to still highlight them because I do think their representation matters. And I think the other part of their stories that really matters is the fact that their sexuality is not the primary driving factor in their representation in the story. Will has shown up as a main character multiple times in multiple different stories, but a lot of times in certain forms of media, a lot of times it's movies, TV shows, if you have a gay character, or in Will's case, I believe he is bisexual, that character's sexuality is almost always like the story for that character. There's not much character development for them otherwise. And of course, that's not how things should be. Whether you are bisexual in the case of Will or gay in the case of Vadric, your sexuality is incredibly important, but it is not the only thing that defines you. Everybody still has your things that you love, your hobbies, the things that you're interested in, the things that make you you. And while your sexual orientation is incredibly important to who you are, it does not need to be the only thing that's important. And I think these characters do a great job of representing that in the Magic story. As for the deck itself, this is a life gain deck because you want to gain as much life as you can with Will to make your spells cheaper, and then Vadric is also going to be making your spells cheaper, so we're playing a ton of super expensive cards that we want to trim down the cost of to be able to play them very cheap and play as many as possible on just a single turn. Next up, we're going to move into deck number 26. This is Non-Binary Nuances. And for everyone who may not know, we talked about non-binary earlier, not ascribing to a single gender, something that I think a lot of people struggle with because it's very difficult to discover that, and it's very difficult to get other people to understand that. But I think the Aetherborn themselves in Magic play a good role of representing the non-binary, well, I guess gender, because being able to be non-binary is important, and every single Aetherborn is non-binary because they are living creatures that were born from Aether. They technically don't have a gender that could be matched up with the genders that we may think of in the real world, and so every single one of them is non-binary regardless of how they may present. And I think that that is a very interesting and unique aspect of Magic. So I wanted to make sure that I highlighted the Aetherborn in general, and also mention that it is very important and relevant for you to be your own person, make your own choices, be happy, and create your own happiness. Because unfortunately, there's not a ton of times when someone else is going to create your happiness for you. If someone does, that's amazing and that's awesome, and I'm happy for you. But we also got to remember to love ourselves as well. So with that, the deck itself is, like I said, all about Aetherborn, and there's also some changelings in there because there's only like 17 Aetherborn in all of Magic, which I had no idea before I started building this deck. And then there's also a servo sub-theme in here because a surprising amount of Aetherborn care about servos or make servos, so I figured we might as well make that the other theme of the deck as well. Moving on to deck number 27, we have the Non-Binary Rule 0. And this deck was very difficult when I started building this. I knew from the beginning I wanted to try to include as many LGBT members of the Magic community as possible, and I knew that that meant I had to try to include Ashiok and Niko Aris, who are both canonically non-binary. But that became really difficult in building the deck because neither of them have legendary creature cards. They only have planeswalker cards. And so I decided to just kind of say, who cares? I can kind of do what I want. I'm building my own deck with 2 planeswalkers as the commanders, which is why it's a Rule 0. So I wanted to represent some more characters in Magic that are incredibly relevant to the story. In fact, we know Niko Aris is about to show up again. Ashiok has shown up a lot over the past couple of years. They're very relevant characters. They're very powerful characters, and they deserve to be representation. And so with that, the deck itself is a mill deck. We want to use Ashiok's ability to mill. We want to use Nico's ability to create shards because we have cards in the deck that care about when enchantments enter the battlefield. And so we're really just focused pretty heavily on the mill and the exile. Moving on to deck number 28, we have Be Gay, Do Crimes with Mary Read and Anne Bonny, and Marchesa, Dealer of Death. So the new up-and-coming Assassin's Creed decks are giving us some historical figures, Mary Read and Anne Bonny being two of the primary ones. And while it's not 100% confirmed that they were lesbians during their time as pirates, we're pretty confident from a historical standpoint that that is what's the most accurate version of the story. So in this case, they are representation of themselves in historical figures, but also we're going to use them along with Marchesa to represent another bit of the poly line, having 3 people involved. And then, of course, just the, I guess, quote unquote, the meme of Be Gay, Do Crimes. It's, of course, the month of June, so if you're gay, commit as many crimes as you want legally, I suppose. Can you commit crimes legally? I don't know. Anyway, the point being, this is a crime deck, and it's also a pirate deck. We want to be able to play as many pirates and commit as many crimes as we want because, you know, why not? That's part of the fun. So, moving on to day number 29, we have Bayzel with Lae'zel Vlaakith's Champion and Shadowheart Dark Justiciar. So, if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, you will probably recognize these 2 characters. They are probably the most shipped characters out of all the companions in Baldur's Gate 3. They don't tend to like each other very much, which is why everyone probably wants to ship them together. Everyone loves a good enemies to lovers story. So of course we figured, let's turn that into a commander deck and represent some characters that the community is widely accepting of as being gay characters, even though in the game I believe they are both technically pan or bisexual, as you can be romancing them with male, female, or non-binary characters. As for the deck itself, this is a Super Friends deck to take the most advantage of Lae'zel's ability to put additional counters on your planeswalkers, but it's also got some aristocrat themes in there to take advantage of Shadowheart's ability to sacrifice creatures and draw cards, so it really plays into what both of the commanders want to be doing, but it really is the Super Friends that then make tokens and make creatures that want to die for Shadowheart. And then finally, we get to our last deck of the month, a massive 30 decks. This last one is titled Pride is for Everyone. And you may notice this is the very first 5-color deck. I wanted to end with 5-color because I wanted to make sure that we are talking about Pride for everyone. So we're talking about the original gay couple in Magic, Kynaios and Tiro of Melodis, and of course their pet cat, Falthis Shadowcat Familiar. So this deck is a group hug style deck. It wants to just help out the table as much as possible. And then it does focus on card draw as well because we're going to be drawing cards with our commanders. And it is very heavily focused on Kynaios and Tiro. Falthis is kind of just here for the colors, but I think the deck itself is a ton of fun. And as for the actual theme, like I said, some more representation. Pride really is for everybody. So I want to just say thank you to everyone for going on this ride with me through my 30 days of Pride decks. If this is something you're interested in seeing again, please do let me know. But no matter who you are, where you come from, who you love, you are valid, you deserve to be happy, and you're amazing. So with that being said, thank you all so much for going on this journey with me. I had a ton of fun doing this. I really hope that you found a deck that represents you. If you are a member of the LGBT community, I would love to know if you put any of these decks together. If you did happen to also build a Pride deck for June, so 2 different partners, I would love to know about that as well. So, like I said, thank you for joining me on this adventure through our 30 days of Pride. Happy Pride 2024. I love you all. Thank you all so much. And with all of that being said, I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.